Hello, I'm Hunter.
And I'm John, and this is another episode of Suspension Simplified by MTB Dev.
All right, John, so today we're going to tell everyone about the dampers and exactly where the energy goes when you're riding a bike and using one of these fancy schmancy shocks or forks.
Awesome. Let's start with a spring. What does the spring do with the energy?
So the spring is fairly simple. It's going to store kinetic energy as potential energy. And what that means is when the spring compresses, it still has the same amount of energy it took to compress the spring stored up in it. And it's in potential energy. And it's waiting to release that energy when it springs back. And it's pretty basic in function. It's got a 400-pound spring on this one, which means for every 400 pounds force, I'm going to compress an inch. Let's see if I can do it. You ready?
Go for it.
All right, that was about an inch.
So that seems pretty straightforward. Why wouldn't we just use springs to suspend our bike then?
Well, it'd be like an old Suburban going down the road and hitting a pothole. It would just bounce up and down forever.
So it would oscillate.
Yeah, until some outside force acted upon it.
Just move up and down and up and down.
Yeah.
So we'd need something to control that. Let's take a look at that damper there.
All right, here you go.
So the damper uses the kinetic energy, converts that into heat via friction. So inside of this damper, it's actually oil filled, and there's a piston connected to this damper shaft. And so as the damper shaft moves in, the piston moves through the oil. The oil moves past the piston using little holes called orifices. It also moves past shims and base valve assemblies, depending on the type of suspension that you have.
That's pretty cool. So we're basically taking all of the travel that has and using it to convert energy into heat, right?
Right, but not all of the energy. We're just taking
Okay.
the energy out of the system that we don't want. So
Right.
on the compression stroke, that has a lot to do with your riding style, the type of bike, and the type of terrain you're on. On the rebound stroke, its only job is to control how fast that spring extends, because the only thing forcing the shock to extend, forcing the suspension to extend, is the spring. And so you just want to match it to that.
That makes sense. So the rebound's more tunable for the specific shock. It's not something that you got to be worrying about all the time. You should set that and forget it for the most part.
Set and forget. Your
Cool.
compression settings, those you can mess around with a little more, but once you get them set up, it's pretty simple.
Okay, so it's pretty obvious how this is working. Spring, damper. How about that fork you have over there?
So it has the same two basic components. We've got a spring of some sorts, whether that's coil or air, and then we have a damper. And these are tied together using the lowers, which use an axle and an arch to make it one complete package that moves up and down with a wheel along the stanchion. So it telescopes up and down, and then the control of the wheel is the sum of both the air spring and the damper.
Oh, that's really cool. So we've touched a little bit on that, and I feel like we have a good idea that the energy is going to heat. That heat then comes through the lowers and into the atmosphere so that we don't have to deal with all that extra energy. It's just dissipated in a really useful fashion.
So only the energy that we don't want.
Right, because we want the fork to return.
Exactly.
So we want to be in the middle of the travel. Now, we can't just have air in these, obviously.
Right.
The air would be super unpredictable. It would change a lot as it increased in temperature. The properties would change, and we wouldn't be able to get consistent energy dissipation over the course of our ride.
Right.
Or even a course of different conditions. If we had our bike somewhere and moved it to a place that was hotter or colder than when we first set it up. It's just really not a good idea. So the important thing to know is that the shocks have a specific oil in them that is really good at absorbing all of the heat that's generated when you're using the suspension, because that's where the energy is being dissipated. So that basically sums it up. We really appreciate you watching this episode of Suspension Simplified by MTV Dev. We're sure to have more in-depth videos on specific topics in the future, so stay tuned and hit that subscribe button. Tell your friends. We appreciate you. Have a good one.